This semester, thousands of college students will take part in strange and secret initiation rituals, bizarre rites of passage in a desperate bid to belong.
I believe, personally, that there's hazing in every university in the entire country.
It's a hidden world of violence and humiliation, where a desire to fit in makes some students risk their own lives.
Chad did nothing different from all the other pledges there that night, except to die.
Seeing a child start a new life at college is a proud moment for any parent. But most of us have little idea what our children may go through in order to gain entry to the elite world of the fraternity. Presidents, senators, judges, business leaders spent their formative years in college frat houses. There is fellowship, camaraderie, and good fun. But there can be a dark side as well: hazing. Tonight, Investigative Reports joins forces with the journalists of the New York Times to uncover some of the often brutal and sometimes deadly rituals that take place behind frat house doors. We'll meet victims who have broken the code of silence, parents and officials who are trying to stop the abuses, and learn why hazing is still a deadly game. Chad Saucier came from a good home and had a happy childhood. He was a talented athlete and a gifted student.
He loved to make people laugh. He loved being the clown. He wasn't perfect. But he was a good kid.
Chad had always wanted to study at Auburn University in Alabama, close to where his divorced parents lived. He joined a fraternity as soon as he started college. But within weeks of joining, Chad phoned his father with disturbing news.
They were beginning to do some things which he didn't really agree with. I think initially it was things like doing setups or exercising and having to get up early to go clean the house or stay late to clean the fraternity house, and he felt like he wasn't getting enough sleep.
But then it was hard for me to reach him at his apartment. And finally he had admitted that they weren't supposed to talk to anyone other than the fraternity members. It seems that that's the way it begins. It's just annoying things, and then it builds to more dangerous activity.
And they had a bag or a pillowcase placed over their heads, and they were pushed around and verbally abused. And his roommate, who was also a pledge, had actually gotten hit and had a cut, I think, above his eye.
Every year, over 100,000 students join fraternities or sororities, which are often named using letters from the Greek alphabet. Before they're allowed to join, new recruits or pledges must submit to initiation tests to prove they are suitable for membership. Sometimes the tests are harmless, demeaning pranks, like cleaning out the men's room with a toothbrush. But often, the pledges are expected to submit to bizarre and frightening rituals involving dangerous drinking games, bondage, blindfolds, and even beatings. This is hazing. Chad Saucier wasn't the first student to be hazed and won't be the last. At Western Illinois University, Nick Haben died during a lacrosse club initiation. Michael Davis was fatally beaten in his fraternity chapter at Southeast Missouri State. Barry Ballou died in an alcohol-related hazing incident at the University of South Carolina.
Unfortunately, that there are people who still think it's funny, still think I had to do it, so why don't they have to do it? It didn't hurt me, it can't hurt them, but you can never say what's going to damage another person.
Hank Newer is the country's leading authority on hazing. He's been tracking hazing cases for 30 years and is the author of Wrongs of Passage and other books documenting this hidden world.
Well, for me, the most disturbing single statistic would be that there's been a pledging-related or hazing death every year since 1970. Because I track these and I look at the numbers and quantify them, I would say that it's getting more violent just as society is getting more violent.
Neuer says hazing is going on at every university in the country. So far this year, he's identified more than one hazing incident a week and believes that only a small percentage of cases actually come to light. Chad Saussier's experience at Auburn wasn't unusual, nor were his reasons for putting up with hazing.
He says if you just quit, then you tend to be blackballed, and no other fraternity will even acknowledge you, or there's no chance of you getting into another fraternity, and you're just ostracized on campus.
Once a student enters the secret world of the fraternity, hazing can be seen as a price worth paying for joining an elite.
People put each other through ordeals and trials where basically they're ground down to the same level, so in the expectation of getting power and status later. Once you pass the ordeal of pledging, you're in, and these are brothers or sisters for life.
There is a clear pattern in the hazing cases Hank Neuer has researched. Rowdy but harmless fun often degenerates into humiliating and sometimes dangerous behavior.
But I kind of see it as a risk-taking behavior, a gambling that eventually catches up with a group. If you practice it long enough, sooner or later, it's going to catch up with you and someone's going to get close to dying or actually die.
As Chad Saussier found out, when hazing starts, it's not something one 19-year-old boy can easily stop. Chad might have survived his weeks of hazing, but at the Christmas party, there was one last fraternity house tradition he had to endure.
Expected to do the traditional things which previous pledge brothers had done, and that was to exchange a bottle of whiskey with their big brother.
To prove his worth to the fraternity, the pledge was expected to drink most of the whiskey, despite the risk of alcohol poisoning.
It was known that the pledges had to drink theirs straight and fast.
And it became apparent that he had passed out outside of the fraternity house, had been lifted, partially drugged upstairs and placed in a room.
And about an hour later, someone went in to get a beer, and they saw Chad, and he said he was turning blue and having difficulty breathing.
He never was able to regain a heartbeat or any spontaneous respirations. And pronounced dead.
All I could think about was, I remember running into his room and just grabbing everything that was important to him, you know, his baseball caps, his pictures, some of his trophies, and like if I could hold on to him, you know, he wouldn't be gone.
According to the coroner's report, Chad Saussier died with a blood alcohol content of .371, 3 times the legal limit. The bottle of whiskey he drank as part of the hazing ritual killed him. In the aftermath of Chad's death, the university threw his fraternity off campus for 3 years, though no individual frat members were expelled or even suspended. In hazing cases, it's often the victim who takes the blame. The Saussiers were left facing the tragedy of their son's death and the suggestion he was responsible. After all, Chad had decided to pledge, and he chose to drink the alcohol that killed him.
I never heard of people making others drink. And then to think that a normal, intelligent person would do it.
The pressures on students to submit to hazing are difficult for those outside college life to understand. Things look different from the student's point of view.
When there's that much pressure that you're there, and there's that unspoken word that's there that you have to do this, people are scared. They're scared that something else worse might happen to them, or they might get beaten up, or you don't know what's going to happen. So there's always that unspoken word that says you have to do this.
At New York's Pace University, psychologist Dr. Rachel Lauer is nationally recognized for her work on student behavior. Dr. Lauer believes that secrecy, peer pressure, and the desire to belong can make all students vulnerable to hazing.
Most of the time what they've heard is that these rituals are fun. It's only when they get out of hand that the question arises, why do they allow it? The peer pressure is also tremendous. The youngsters are simply made to feel chicken if they don't prove they're a men or upstanding enough to prove their capacity.
Rita Saucier wonders why her son died and who is to blame.
The thing about the victim is it's so easy to blame them. But Chad did nothing different from all the other pledges there that night except to die.
19-year-old Chad Saucier died after an alcohol-related hazing incident at Alabama's Auburn University. But his isn't an isolated case. In the last 10 years, students have died at colleges all across the country: MIT, Texas, Clarkson, Louisiana State, Western Illinois, and one in March this year at Ferris State in Michigan. Hazing occurs in Ivy League universities and local colleges to men and women, black and white. And these deaths come out of a heavy drinking culture that appears to be getting worse. At the Alabama hospital where Chad Saucier died, 2 college students are admitted every week simply for drinking too much alcohol. The pattern is reflected around the country.
At any moment, somewhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of the student body cannot legally drink, but we all know that they do. And that causes a big problem because if they were able to drink at 18, they'd be out in the bars, they'd be paying for their alcohol, they'd be drinking with lots of other people there keeping an eye on them, and now what happens is they're in their rooms with 2 or 3 friends, getting completely drunk and then going to the hospital because nobody was there to say stop.
A recent Harvard University study found that over 40% of students were binge drinkers. And students admit that drinking is an essential part of college life.
I think college is, you're breaking away from mom and dad.
I don't think a lot of people particularly even want to get drunk. I think it's just kind of the thing to do.
I love drinking because I've gone through about a 6-pack tonight.
The survey also showed that the heaviest drinkers on campus were those who belonged to fraternities and sororities.
And then there's a lot of fraternities and sororities, so there's a lot of, keg parties and stuff like that all the time.
Alcoholics Anonymous. That's my fraternity. I pledge your brothers every night.
Hazing rituals often involve extreme drinking games. In fact, hazing and drinking go hand in hand.
Drank between 3 people, a fifth and a half of bourbon, and taken out in the woods and dropped off on Nowhere Road. And then had to find our way back. Everybody got arrested, actually, except for myself.
They got him really drunk, and they made him strip down and run through right there where the statues are.
And alcohol is also useful in making pledges lose their inhibitions.
The baby elephant walk, shit like that.
There's a rough shit going on.
Yeah.
One of my good friends had an M80 firecracker stuck in his cheeks and lit. We had an older brother that forced a younger brother to actually bite the head off a dead rat and hold it in his mouth for about 5 or 10 minutes and then spit it out. And that was fairly heinous.
Debbie Connor is head of student affairs at Auburn University. She's also an expert on hazing rituals and their causes.
Well, alcohol continues to be one of our #1 problems on any college campus, and it most certainly does impair someone's judgment in anything that they're doing. But if you put them in a setting of a party or a setting where there's a lot of people that are drinking, all of a sudden the likelihood of a hazing incident happening has increased.
Connor says the college has strong anti-hazing and anti-alcohol programs in place. She insists the college does as much as can be expected to prevent students from harming themselves.
We are not that unusual here at all, unfortunately. I think probably the amount of hazing and the possible underground activity may be going on at almost all campuses.
Across the country, college authorities seem powerless to protect students from hazing. Fraternity houses are private property, controlled by students. So even when built on a college campus, administrations have tended not to police them. In general, fraternities are rarely shut down for drinking and hazing. Debbie Connor argues that the main weapon colleges have is to try and change drunken student behavior by persuasion.
We tend to focus on our student leadership and developing stronger leaders so that as students, they can work to change the culture. And because it is a student culture, administrators aren't going to change it. It's got to be the students themselves that do that.
But critics argue that colleges can't pass the buck. They must take responsibility for their students' safety.
I want the deans to realize they're not in a job that's a popularity contest, and to demand responsible behavior and to check frequently. And particularly if you've had hazing in the past in a group.
I think that people do party. It's a normal college experience. And that fraternities and sororities have been there to provide the parties for the students.
The frat boys, they can sit there and get drunk as shit, man. I've seen them chug like bottles of 151 and sit there and hug the toilet for hours. I've been there too young, you know what I'm saying?
Many fraternities and sororities are not under the authority of the university, and for a lot of them it's the first time they really had freedom to do what they want to do when they want to do it, so they really enjoy this freedom. But also there's a lot of competition among them in order to get what they call the best students in, or the ones that they feel will fit in the best.
This is a recruitment party held in the fall of 1998 at a fraternity house at the University of Iowa.
I'm here to talk about the most important thing. Whatever they say, it's not true.
The brothers are trying to attract new pledges by boasting about drinking and sex.
Drink a lot of beer. Awesome. We do beer bongs. We party. We get drunk. Every fraternity does that.
There is no evidence that this fraternity hazes new members.
Awesome. Drink more beer, dude.
Some frats compete for the reputation of holding the toughest and most bizarre initiation ceremonies.
God, I went through, everything from, beatings to, strange ritualistic stuff. But honestly, I can say some of it increases your character.
The harder it is for a student to get in, the more the students appreciate being in and the more loyal they will be. So there's a lot of effort at making this rite of passage a very important event.
When we come back, how one student barely survived his initiation into a fraternity.
One of the doctors came and let me know that it was possible that I wouldn't make it through the night.
For many college students, the instant social life and circle of friends offered by a fraternity or a sorority is one of the highlights of life on campus. But for some, the embarrassing, humiliating, and sometimes dangerous hazing they endure to gain entry to the fraternity ruins their education and their lives. As our A&E New York Times special report continues, what are the traditions that allow hazing to continue? And how are victims fighting back? Sean Blackston attends the University of Louisville in Kentucky. During his first year of college, Sean wanted to join a fraternity. He soon found out how brutal hazing traditions can be.
I just wanted some basic brotherhood, some camaraderie with guys that I felt were like myself. So I was drawn to Omega Psi Phi. A lot of religious figures are in that fraternity. You see a lot of the good things they do, and you know a lot of the popular members of the fraternity, so you never see the bad side of the fraternity.
The African-American fraternity Omega Psi Phi was founded in 1911 with the motto, "Friendship is essential to the soul." Sean decided to pledge. During the day, he carried on with his classes, but after dark, almost every night for 6 weeks, he was subjected to sleep deprivation, incessant exercise, and physical abuse.
If you're not man enough to make it to the end, or if you start and you drop out, you know, it's a pretty humiliating process. And the guys, you know what I'm saying, that are taking you through, they're encouraging you, you know what I'm saying, to stay and to stick with it on one hand, and then on the other hand, they telling you, well, you ain't gonna make it, you're not man enough, you know, go ahead and quit.
And this pressure was enough to keep Sean and the other pledges from leaving, even when the psychological abuse turned into beatings with the fraternity paddle.
It was just a lot of paddling involved. It was a lot of, I guess, physical threats. It was just harder than any other night. And during that night, I had passed out because of the amount of paddling or whatever that I had took. 2 days later, when I noticed that I hadn't went to the bathroom or anything, and every time I would eat some food, I would throw it up, and then I started throwing up blood, and then I decided then that it was time to go to the hospital and get myself checked.
Sean was admitted to the hospital and remained there for 15 days. He was suffering from renal failure. His kidneys had shut down because of the effects of the brutal and repeated beatings he had received at the hands of the fraternity.
And the first night that I was there, one of the doctors came and let me know that it was possible that I wouldn't make it through the night.
Once beatings and abuse are accepted as the normal initiation into a chapter, pledges are made to feel that they would be letting the group down if they don't submit as well. This is part of the cycle of hazing that allows it to continue year after year. The victims of one year become the abusers of the next.
Everything that was done to us was identical, or it was done to them also. We all came into the fraternity the same way. 90% of the fraternity comes in the same exact way that I did.
Because you're fighting against years of tradition, and you're fighting against the mentality that, oh, I had to go through it, so why don't they? And you're fighting against stereotypes, and even after you do change your pledge program to try to get rid of all the hazing, people still think that you haze.
Running a local chapter of a fraternity or sorority can be a heavy burden for anyone. 20-year-old Steph Webster is president of a sorority at Alfred University in New York.
Somewhere in the 60s and 70s, the leadership, the adult leadership of the Greek community stepped out, and they said, you guys can take care of yourselves. I'm not really sure why they did that. Maybe they were frustrated with having to fight the Animal House mentality.
Local chapters are run by students who have a lot of freedom to control their fraternity houses and their pledges. But in light of recent violent hazing cases, those responsible for fraternities at the national level have realized they must intervene. Men like past president of the National Fraternity Council, Greg Hauser.
Everybody who engages in hazing or who tolerates hazing does it for a different set of reasons. I think that some of it has to do with the desire for succeeding at a rite of passage as a young person. Some of it's sadism, some of it's masochism. Some of it is just unthinking tradition. It happened to me, I'm going to do it to somebody else.
Hazing has been going on since universities were first founded. Fraternities have flourished since early in the 19th century. The first known hazing death was recorded in the New York Times in 1899 when a Kappa Alpha pledge at Cornell drowned after being dumped blindfolded near a cliff. 100 years later, hazing still exists. Greg Hauser insists that national fraternities are now working to protect their members and can impose heavy sanctions if an individual chapter is caught allowing violent hazing to continue.
If a chapter's caught, there's discipline. If the incident's serious enough, the chapter might be closed. Individual members may be expelled. There's a lot of punishment that's meted out every year to chapters that are caught hazing.
The trouble is, most hazing is never publicly exposed. And on the ground, the national policies are easily ignored.
Nowadays, I think students are more heavily influenced by the culture of the other fraternity chapters on their campus than by whatever their national or international fraternity says to them.
We have what the kids, young people call paper members and demon members. The paper members follow what the national organizations want. The demon members are doing the done thing to make the group better and to give it status.
And that's so they can hit you with a wooden paddle. And being hit with the wooden paddle is called taking wood.
Sean Blackston took a stand against hazing in his fraternity and brought his case to court. Rather than sue the fraternity members who had beaten him, Sean went after the national organization for failing to protect him. Sean's lawyers argued that simply having an anti-hazing policy wasn't enough. In Sean's case, the person responsible for implementing the anti-hazing policy was one of those doing the beating. In a groundbreaking judgment, Sean was awarded nearly $1 million in punitive damages against the national fraternity. After decades of silence, the injured are finally speaking up, forcing national fraternities to take responsibility for their members' actions. Sean's settlement will make hazing difficult to ignore.
It was never about money for me. I mean, I started out, with zero, and I could have ended with zero as long as my point was proven that the national fraternity can't, continue to turn their head on situations like mine.
This is part of an initiation ceremony carried out by the soccer team at Quincy University in Illinois. It's a team tradition, normally kept hidden behind closed doors, and here videotaped for the first time by members themselves. Blindfolded and barefooted, pledges are told to jump off a chair onto tacks. In fact, it's only popcorn. These rookies all took part willingly. They don't call it hazing. Initiations onto sports teams are extremely common. In many places, they are tacitly accepted, even by coaches, as part of a team's tradition. Almost every college athlete has some experience of this type of initiation.
I think the traditional idea of hazing, in which physical violence or alcohol, I think a lot of that hinges around the belong to tradition and the traditions that past great athletes have gone through that are part of the program and belong to that program, that rich tradition.
Those who took part in the initiation at Quincy felt it formed a bond of trust between teammates that couldn't be gained any other way. The problem for authorities is separating out what's dangerous from what's harmless. Increasingly, they're recognizing that forced rituals of any kind can be damaging, even if nobody is physically injured. In Vermont, a hazing incident on the university's hockey team became the subject of an investigation by the state attorney general.
A lot of us put athletes on pedestals, and we think that, they're heroes not only on the rink or the playing field, but in their private lives. And so a lot of people just scratching their heads and saying, they did what? And they've been doing it for years? Can't believe it.
Corey LaTulip was a third-string goalie with the hockey team. In February this year, he blew the whistle on a bizarre initiation ceremony, supposedly designed to bring the team closer together. Corey didn't want to talk on camera. He still feels traumatized by what happened.
Drinking, shaving of pubic hair, adulterated pie eating contests where people were sick to their stomach, so-called elephant walk, where while nude, the freshmen paraded as a single file holding the genitals of the player in front, strippers, drinking large quantities of warm beer so that all of the players got sick into a bucket in this dark room in the basement of the so-called hockey house. You get the flavor.
Investigators learned this behavior had been going on for years. The Attorney General was called in after it became clear the university's own internal inquiry had failed to determine all the facts.
You know, I think university regretted that this ever happened, but they very much wanted to kind of keep it quiet, keep it within the family, and not have all this public scrutiny. By and large, I think the university mishandled this thing badly.
University officials refused to accept blame, saying that the players involved lied to them and covered up what really happened. The campaign against hazing in Vermont started before the hockey team case. It's been spearheaded by Burlington teenager Lizzie Murty and her mother. Lizzie was only 14 when she was terrorized and humiliated one night by being forced to mimic oral sex in the middle of a parking lot, while older members of her high school gymnastic team stood by.
Well, the girls that night told us that if we told anybody about it, that we would be kicked off the team and that there wouldn't be a gymnastics team anymore and that we would get expelled from school. And so pretty much nobody on the team said anything.
Lizzie knows the pressures on hazing victims to remain silent and go along with the group's wishes.
There's always the fear of if you say no also. Will I really not be on the team, or do they actually have a say in whether I'm on the team or not, or will I not belong anymore, and what will happen?
Lizzie was told by her teammates that her hazing would build loyalty and team spirit, though her own experience tells her that's not true.
I've spoken with a lot of hazing victims, and everyone that I've spoken with said it just destroys a team and it pulls them apart.
The first ever national survey on hazing in college sports teams was conducted for Alfred University in New York. Its findings suggest that hazing is almost universal and should never be dismissed as harmless.
In the study, we found that 80% of the respondents said they were involved in some kind of humiliating, dangerous, or illegal behavior.
Half were involved in some kind of drinking contest or alcohol-related activity. 8% said they had engaged in some kind of sexual activity. 7% said they'd been tied up and confined in small places.
Very few of the students recognizing those activities as hazing, and even fewer of them that would be willing to report it.
What the survey proves is that the hazing in Vermont was unusual only because it was publicized. The Attorney General released a damaging report of the university and the hockey team. In response, the university canceled the hockey season at a cost of several $100,000, and the reverberations are still being felt around the state.
Well, I've spoken with the former goalie from UVM, and I know it's had a devastating effect on his life. I mean, he can't go back to school. It left a mark on him that's never going to go away, and also with me, too. I'm never going to forget about what happened.
Corey LaTulip has also begun a lawsuit against the university. What had traditionally been dismissed as rowdy yet harmless adolescent games became the subject of legal proceedings. The Vermont Attorney General believes the case also identified a gap in the state law.
Who are you going to prosecute? Are you going to prosecute the freshmen who were grabbing each other's genitals, or the upperclassmen who told them to do it? I mean, who's guilty here? Who are the victims? The freshmen are the victims. Are they also the perpetrators?
Vermont has no law against hazing, though in the wake of the hockey case, anti-hazing legislation is being pushed through the state Senate. This will bring it in line with 41 other states where hazing is now illegal.
Maybe if a law was in place last year and people would have taken me more serious last year, that maybe it would have made some of the hockey players think twice before doing this to the freshmen.
20 years ago, Eileen Stevens sent her son Chuck to Alfred University in upstate New York. She'd hoped he would get involved with college life. She didn't expect him to join a fraternity.
Chuck was the kind of a young man that loved his friends and loved that camaraderie that came with friendships. And I'm sure he was very attracted to the group because they were all athletes. They had something in common.
Chuck pledged Clan Alpine fraternity because his roommate was also joining.
We had spoken to him the night before. We had no idea that he planned. In fact, I believe it was a spontaneous decision. He had only decided to pledge that fraternity that very day. He decided to pledge at 4 in the afternoon, and he was dead by 11.
The college never told Eileen that Chuck was a victim of hazing. School officials said he had died of alcohol poisoning.
We were never told it was a hazing situation until his roommate was compelled by his conscience to pick up the telephone and tell me the truth. In Chuck's case, he was taken by surprise late at night from his dorm room, locked in a car trunk with 2 other boys, given a terrible mixture of bourbon, wine, and beer in freezing cold. No one knows how long he was in the trunk. And he never woke up because the alcohol killed him, and the other boys were hospitalized for several days, and fortunately they lived.
No one took responsibility for Chuck's death. Back then, Eileen met a wall of silence from college authorities.
They had a hands-off policy, indicating that the groups were off campus. And I think those things are cop-outs because these are students at your university or at your college. You have the right to expel them, to suspend them, to take immediate action.
Since then, Eileen has campaigned tirelessly on campuses across the country to change attitudes about hazing. She wants colleges to take responsibility for the care of their students. She has campaigned the hardest at Alfred University, where her son died, and the school appears to be listening. Officials there now treat hazing as a serious offense, but even they haven't managed to stamp it out completely. 2 years ago, the school's football team was involved in a bizarre and violent initiation, similar to what Chuck experienced.
Hazing took place, significant hazing, forced alcohol consumption, bondage. In fact, they were tied together by their wrists, and we wound up with 2 students hospitalized.
This time, however, the university did not try to duck the blame. They reacted immediately.
I was the first university administrator to learn of the incident, and I immediately called the police, which is one thing we do. We don't think about image or covering up something, we think about stopping it and taking appropriate action. Within 48 hours, we had interviewed every victim so that we could get all the relevant information, because one of the problems with hazing is the code of silence, and there's tremendous pressure on the victims of hazing not to talk, and you need to get to them before that pressure is exerted, and we did.
In addition to involving the police, the college handed down its own punishment, suspending some students and throwing others off the football team. The university also canceled and forfeited the first game of the season.
People were surprised that we took as strong an action as we did. What we're saying is if you do it on this campus, you're risking a lot. And among other things, you're risking your education. And we're trying to make the stakes high enough that people will have a second and a third thought before they'll engage in it. Because we think it's that important. There's no place for hazing in an educational institution, period.
Swimming and diving teams have traditionally been extremely prone to hazing. Coaches have often turned a blind eye to violent behavior by team members. Alfred's swimming coach, T.J. Davis, wants to break that tradition.
There's some old school coaches, and I come from a background where certainly hazing was a part of my athletic experience. Initiation rites were brutal, and as a coach, I try not to do too much of this is the way it was for me, so this is the way it's going to be for you, and I try to do more what's going to be the best thing to make these student athletes get a great experience while competing at the highest level performance.
Students at Alfred University know the consequences if they are caught violating the school's anti-hazing policy. The message seems to be hitting home with the new members of the swimming team.
We don't want anything to affect whether we're going to be swimming next year or participating in sports, so we know that we don't need it and it's not going to be tolerated.
Everyone is made aware of it, and we're made aware of the consequences that will happen if we engage in hazing.
We don't want to see anything happen to the program in like a black mark, because if a large hazing incident took place, the swimming program would pretty much be gone, and the same holds true for any sports program.
Though simply outlawing hazing isn't enough. At Alfred University, officials recognize that students need to be offered something to replace it. If anything has emerged from all the hazing cases that have come to light, It's the deep need for initiation rites to allow new students to feel they belong.
I definitely think it's important to have initiations. It really brings about the feeling of a unit and makes people feel like I'm part of the system and I'm important to the success of the team.
So now we require every athletic team, the coach is required to have 2 bonding initiation type events prior to the start of the competitive seasons.
Events at Alfred now include trust walks, training trips out of state, charity drives, and official ceremonies in the locker room to welcome new members.
They're very positive. They create more of a unit as a team. We're all, instead of seeing someone as a freshman, you see him as another teammate, as a friend, and someone who's going to back you up when you're in competition.
But not all students at Alfred University believe the school's anti-hazing policy is effective. There is some concern that within the fraternities, it might even be counterproductive.
I think you can over-legislate things. You can't stop things necessarily from happening. I'm a little afraid that groups are going to start closing up their rituals so tightly and really endangering their pledges because they're keeping everything so secret because they don't want to get caught. And that if somebody gets hurt, there's going to be hesitation before taking them to the hospital or hesitation before calling somebody in to stop the problem because they don't want to get caught, and that could be a big problem.
But where do you draw the line with hazing? And our line is there'll be none, period. And there's no such thing as a little hazing. Because if we start to say a little hazing is okay, then again, where's that line drawn? And we're back into people's lives being at risk.
Alfred University, unlike some other colleges around the country, recognizes there is a problem with hazing and is trying to address it. But violent incidents on other campuses are still happening. There was yet another report of hazing as recently as March of this year.
You don't know if they have pre-existing health conditions, and you don't know if they have pre-existing emotional conditions. And unfortunately, people really do have that idea that it's okay still.
Yes, we have a tremendous amount of great kids where we don't have a problem, but we have deaths and injuries and psychic trauma and demeaning behavior. And this is on a college and high school campus where we're supposed to be civilized and educated. So we haven't come as far as we need to come.
And one of the things I say to students when I speak to them is, have the courage to say no. Have the courage to speak out. If you have that kind of courage and maturity, you might save a life.
Parents like Eileen Stevens and Rita Saucier know the cost of hazing. While it's too late to save their children, they will continue their fight to change the culture on college campuses and try to bring an end to hazing.
It's not about Chad anymore because Chad's gone. I still grieve for Chad, but this is more about helping other parents and other children so it won't happen to them.
In August, the parents of a Texas college student who died in yet another drunken hazing reached a $2 million settlement with his fraternity and 11 of its members. And perhaps more disturbing, the New York Times recently reported evidence that brutal initiation rites are no longer just the stuff of college fraternities. The Times identified more than 28 serious incidents this year in high schools across the country, many involving beatings and sexual assaults. But demands are growing that high schools, as well as colleges, take care to protect our students from these deadly games. I'm Bill Curtis. Thanks for watching Investigative Reports.